I am Dena Smith. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of several folks here who offer the reflections. And so I think it will come as a shock to nobody here that I consider myself a person of faith. I mean, you'd hope so. I get to stand up here and talk, so that would be a really good start. But more specifically, I consider myself a person of Christian faith, largely shaped by where I was raised, by whom I was raised, and what resonated with me the most in the past. And because of that, I put an extreme amount of weight on the words of Jesus, exponentially so when they appear in the book of Luke. Because Luke is my guy. He's the gospel writer who saw the overlooked, who lifted up the voices at the margins, and never shied away from justice. That being said, I don't think one could reasonably overstate the righteous indignation I feel on behalf of Martha when I read this passage. Jesus, my friend, my teacher, my savior, I love you, but we gotta talk. Because this take is not fair. This is how you respond to the woman who welcomed you and your 12-man entourage, I might add, fishermen, laborers, and all, crowding into her home. She's running around trying to make sure everyone eats, and somehow she is the one who goes down in history as the busybody who just wouldn't relax. Come on. Maybe I'm a little extra sensitive to this passage, but let's just say it's been a week, or more accurately, a couple of weeks. Moments where I took my strengths, I trusted my ability to work past my blind spots, and I fell flat on my face. And some of you even witnessed it. And the real icing on the cake is that depending on who here you ask, they'll reference a different incident. I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. I love knowledge and growth and new ideas, except when the life lesson is about me. Those aren't fun. Because sometimes, even usually, I try. I really try. I do my best. I'll think that I finally found that balance, that sweet spot between quirky and strong. I step forward, nervous but prepared. And what do I get? My best efforts at cleanup afterwards. The kind words of feedback aren't, "That went great." They're, "You're a good mom. Thank you for apologizing. The best we can promise is to learn and grow and do better next time. Maybe you can bring that up again at a more appropriate time." So yeah, I feel for Martha. She was in boss mode for service in her home, working hard, stressed out, but doing her best. She sought help, misstepped, and now here we are, making an example of the busybody of the New Testament. But Martha has always been more than this moment. A couple of years later in John's gospel, she isn't locked into managing the household. She's the one who sneaks out and runs to meet Jesus while Mary stays behind with the mourners. She declares faith in him as the Messiah before she has any proof that her faith will be rewarded. She is Martha, whom Jesus loved. And when she needed him, when her world was falling apart, he came. He changed course, and he showed up. And when he saw her family weep, he wept with them. So Jesus certainly didn't write her off as the busybody of the New Testament. So maybe we shouldn't either. But to understand Martha's reaction in this moment, we have to understand what she was carrying. She wasn't just managing a meal, she was managing a household and all the expectations that came with it. As presumably the eldest sister, it was her job to set everything into motion. Welcoming Jesus wasn't just an act of hospitality, it was a commitment. There was food to prepare, a space to set up, a reputation to uphold. And Bethany was not just any town. It was in Judea, where tensions around Jesus were rising, where his words were met with more scrutiny and more risk. The stakes were high, and she opened her home. So when her sister dropped her part of the work, of course Martha got flustered. There was too much to do. She took her frustration to Jesus. You see this, right? Tell her to help. And Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Martha wasn't just asking for help, she was asking Jesus to validate her definition of service. To say, yes, this is the right way. This is what matters most. But we are not called to use Jesus' name to validate our own expectations of others and how they serve. We are called to serve, yes. We are called to guide, yes. But not to impose our expectations on others, especially not in the name of the divine. And isn't that exactly what we tend to do when we read this passage? There is only one thing, one important thing. We, the observer, the reader of these four verses, determine Mary does the right thing by dropping her chores to sit at Jesus' feet. Martha doesn't. And yet the next time we hear from Martha in the Gospels, she is not the busybody. She is Martha, the one who Jesus loved. Martha, who kept on serving. My sympathy for Martha comes from more than just this passage. It comes from something far too many people, disproportionately women, know firsthand, and that is the invisible workload. The weight of responsibilities that aren't always seen, let alone appreciated. The burden of holding things together because if I don't, then who will? And this is not just an ancient story. It's a reality that plays out again and again in our world today. It's why, when I think of Martha's frustration, my brain, predictably, takes a detour into pop culture, landing on a moment from The West Wing, a political drama from the late 90s and early 2000s. One of its most beloved characters is C.J. Craig, played by the magnificent Allison Janney. She's a press secretary who later turns chief of staff. She doesn't complain unless you count the occasional sarcastic jab, but we see it, the relentless pace, the weight of decisions, the expectation that she will always be the one to figure it out. In an episode called The Long Goodbye, CJ travels home for a high school reunion while also trying to check in on her father, who is struggling with early onset Alzheimer's. She ends up lashing out at her stepmother for leaving, but the moment is tangled up in anger and guilt and exhaustion. By that point, it doesn't even matter who's right because everyone feels bad for where they are. The episode builds towards a speech where CJ is meant to give at her reunion called The Promise of a Generation. She speaks eloquently, but just as she's about to deliver the hopeful conclusion, she gets a phone call from the White House and has to leave. Her father accepts but doesn't quite accept her assurance that she'll be back to visit soon. The promise was never delivered in the speech. That's because the promise of the generation, of every generation of caregivers, is the reality of being pulled in multiple directions, making impossible choices, and hoping that they work out. And isn't that Martha's reality too? The frustration isn't just about fairness, it's about being the one left to hold everything together. It's about knowing that no matter which choice you make, somebody will tell you it was the wrong one. And CJ had resources, she had choices. But even with all of her options, she still found herself stuck, torn between dueling responsibilities and dueling cares. And this is what it looks like when a woman has financial resources. What about the ones who don't? Many, many, many caregivers, especially in our society, do not have that upon which to fall. As Jessica Clarko explains in her 2024 book, Holding It Together, financial precarity forces communities to rely on the people who hold it together, often women, even when they are stretched to the breaking point. And their reward for surviving is not relief, it's more responsibility. And when they can't keep up, they're shamed for making bad choices. And when they race, run, stretch, reach, and manage to hold it together, They're asked why they don't just relax, as if stepping back was ever really an option, because we know what might happen if we do. Sometimes everything falls into place and it works out just fine. Other times, despite our best efforts, it doesn't. And the difference between the two can be nothing more than a single moment, a lapse in attention, a miscalculation, a detail overlooked, and that's all it takes. We take for granted how quickly something small can spiral into something disastrous. And then comes the aftermath, the weight of responsibility when you're the one who stayed and held it together, who served, and it all went wrong. And that's the cruelest part, isn't it? There's no guarantee, no promise that our effort will equal security, that sacrifice will spare us from regret, that doing everything right will mean it all turns out okay. But I don't believe Jesus' lesson here is simply to just relax. I certainly believe that nobody lies on their deathbed wishing they had spent more time at the office, just like Gary says. But I've had plenty of Thursdays where I certainly wish I had. Because sometimes those extra 10 or 15 minutes, they can save a world of stress on Friday. There have been times where staying late at work has saved my job, helped keep my family afloat, and the margin for survival is getting narrower and narrower, and the effort required to keep up is not something Jesus would have waved away. I believe that. Because there are words of people I loved, people who are no longer with us, that have shaped the very core of who I am, and I can't remember what their voices sound like. You don't need to remind me that time is fleeting. You think I wouldn't have blown off that shift or skipped that midterm, canceled the weekend plans if it meant one more afternoon, one more day of memory, 12 more hours of remembering their voice? We don't get to know, and the choice isn't that easy. We are balancing, and our society is making it harder. And when the weight of it all feels unbearable, when we are stretched too thin, unsure if we are doing enough or doing too much, this is when Jesus says, Martha, Martha. It's not a reprimand, it's a call back. Think of the other times the divine has spoken this way to believers. Moses, Moses from the burning bush. Abraham, Abraham from the mountain. These were times when the message was great and the work was hard. This is no you brood of vipers. This is a calm hand on the shoulder. It's a voice saying, stop, this is important. You are worried and distracted by many things. And of course I am. Look at everything there is to do. Who else is going to do it? There is need of only one thing. But what is it? Because I thought I knew. I thought it was this. I thought it was service, done well, done right. But now Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away. Where does that leave me? Because I still believe in the work, I still believe in service. But what happens when it's too much? When the weight of the work presses in and there is no clear place to set it down? When the need is endless but the helpers are few? When stepping back feels like failing? Because when the task is large, it gets harder and harder and harder to do it alone. We are stretched thinner and thinner, and we get worried and distracted. And it's, of course, not wrong to care. It's not wrong to serve. It's not wrong to want to help when the load is heavy. But what Jesus reminds Martha, and what he reminds us, is that faithful service was never meant to be about control. Martha thought she was doing the right thing, and she was. But she also thought she got to decide how Mary should serve, and that's where she stumbled. And if we're not careful, we do the same. Because how often do we measure someone else's faithfulness against our expectations? How often do we assume our way is the right way, sometimes even invoking Jesus' name to prove it? But Jesus doesn't ask us to choose between Martha and Mary. We're the ones who keep making it about that comparison. We rush to decide that Mary was right and Martha was wrong. But in doing so, we commit the very mistake that Martha did. We dictate how service should look as if Jesus would have asked us to choose between them. And maybe that's why this passage still gets under my skin. Because I know what it feels like to be called out in the moment, to think I'm doing my best, only to realize I've misstepped, overstepped, or misunderstood. I know what it's like to work hard, to care deeply, want things to go well, and find myself standing in the wreckage of good intentions, explaining, apologizing, and trying to clean it up. So maybe Jesus' words to Martha aren't a rebuke at all. Maybe they're an invitation to release the resentment, an invitation to trust that others will serve in the ways that they are called, an invitation to be present in the work, in the stillness, in the struggle. Because as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, not by measuring our work against someone else's, not by assuming that service must look the same for everyone, not by letting resentment take root when others are called in ways that we are not. Me and my house, we will serve the Lord in the ways we are called, with the gifts that we have and the time that we're given, with presence that we can offer, with the resources we are entrusted to steward, our energy, our labor, our bodies, our rest, our love. Because stewardship is not just about what we give, it's also about how we give, how we care for the gifts that we have been given, how we honor the work of our hands without exhausting them, how we make space for others to serve without forcing them into our expectations. Because Martha's service mattered, Mary's presence mattered, and so does yours. So does yours.